All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of Lens. Thank you for being here with us. Today, we have the honor of having and hosting our next guest, Kevin Bethune. Kevin, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Um, a little bit about Kevin. He is the founder and chief creative officer of Dreams, Design, and Life, which, by the way, that is a fantastic name for a company. It is a think tank that delivers design and innovation services using a human centered approach. Kevin's background spans engineering, business, and design in equal proportion over his 20 plus year career, positioning him to help brands deliver meaningful innovations to enrich people's lives. I'm going to have Kevin talk a little bit more about himself when he starts to share his work. But other than that, for those who are tuning in, thank you so much for being here. As Kevin begins his presentation, I encourage the audience to start asking questions in the Q&A section of our webinar. And as soon as he is done presenting, I will integrate those questions into our conversation afterwards. So thank you so much, Kevin, for being here. And like I mentioned before, this webinar is being recorded, so if you want to reference it for later or you miss it, this will be uploaded on our YouTube later this week. So that being said, Kevin, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor to take it from here.
I appreciate it, Hector, and thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. Been loving this platform as I've seen and watched some of the other guests that you've had. So let me share my screen really quick. Share that. And then let's make sure the technology is cooperating. All right. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So, for this conversation, I wanted to just share this perspective of evolution with all the change that's happening. I think, I think first of all, I do hope that this time that we have together finds each and every one safe, healthy, and well, considering all the things that are going on. And if anything, if you're like me, it's caused a lot of moments of introspection through the process, just making sure that, family is okay, I'm personally okay, and all the responsibilities that we all have to juggle. There's just a lot of change going on. And I think that also manifests internally in terms of how we think about ourselves and our path. So that's what I'll be sharing, just some perspective of what the journey has been like leading up to today, and how that also translates, how those personal insights also translates into the professional path and the influence that I've been able to at least garner with my client partners, and we'll share a little bit about that, and then also get into some implications for the future. So in terms of present day, where I'm spending my calories is typically in three places. First, it's leading Dreams, Design, and Life, and delivering what I would call a two-sided coin to the client engagements. And that one side of the coin is this notion of strategic design, really helping company leaders, for companies big and small, navigate volatile waters by just really problem solving the future course of their business through a human-centered lens, a systematic lens, appreciating all the changes that are happening. Secondly, I'm serve as the board chair for the Design Management Institute. And this is a global community of design practitioners and company leaders that really carry design as a strategic imperative for the things that they do. And then lastly, I'm in the final paces of writing my first book with the MIT Press, which will embody several of the notions that we'll share and exchange today. Title to be determined, but expect the book out at some point next year. So again, we're going to talk about evolution, the path, the personal path that leads to the professional, and how those experiences have opened up new and interesting multidisciplinary runways that haven't necessarily existed in the past. And then what do those lessons mean in terms of future implications, and how we should think about our own individual journeys moving forward, as well as the organizations that we're a part of. So to sort of rewind far back to the beginning of my path, I think in the early outset, I had creative inclinations. I drew for hobby very much, but this notion of design was sort of an abstract notion. It wasn't something that was celebrated around me, and it was sort of under the guise of art. It was that far abstract. Having spent the majority of my childhood in the Downriver Detroit area, I was in the heart of big auto. So most of the neighborhood was really celebrating engineers and business people that fed the automotive industry. That was sort of the environment, and design felt like 1,000 miles away. But my interest beyond drawing also centered on science and math, and anywhere where there was coalescence of those forces, I just became very interested. And one anecdote I can remember was, an early Nike commercial where you saw the runner in a laboratory environment being studied while they're running on the treadmill, and you see the collapsing airbag for the first time. Like that was just a really cool anecdote that I locked in on. And then traveling to Disney World and the Epcot Center, the GM World of Motion exhibit was another sort of anecdotal reference point where it's like, oh, wow, the confluence of science, technology, design, in terms of the early notions of what I understood about it, all were coming to a head there. So with all these forces in mind, and especially in as much as my family was sacrificing so much to send their kids potentially to college, there had better have been a pragmatic job waiting on the other side of that investment. And so I chose to study mechanical engineering as a pragmatic first step to begin the career that allowed me to just entertain a lot of these different interest areas in one discipline. So I entered the Notre Dame mechanical engineering degree, and among many of the industries that were coming to campus, the common pitch was, well, as a new hire, you would come into our organization, we'll put you on a plant floor, factory floor as a young engineer, and you'll learn our business for, let's say, 10 years. And then maybe at that point, we'll get you on some hardcore engineering work. And I was just very fascinated with the engineering curriculum, the simulations, the hand calculations, the testing in the lab. Like I really wanted to translate those early learnings in real life application as soon as possible. So that pitch by most companies wasn't necessarily the most inspiring, in as much as I was willing to learn whatever whatever was required to learn the business in and outs. But being able to apply the classroom knowledge so far out was a little disappointing to sort of digest. But there was one industry in particular that had a different pitch, and that was the nuclear power generation industry. Nuclear hadn't hired young talent for the 10 to 15 years prior to me coming out of school, just based on a number of reasons affecting the industry. But now they were in this point of crisis where a lot of the engineers that designed the world's nuclear operating fleet in the first place were on the verge of retirement. So as they retired, there was going to be a huge knowledge drain, and the industry wanted to get on top of it. So they were willing to cast the door wide open to allow young talent to come in and really learn applied engineering skills at the early outset and get on some incredible opportunities. So I spent the next 5 years. I worked out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but I traveled the world, basically delivering hardware upgrades for a lot of nuclear utility plant owners. And we literally would work over open reactor vessels like you see here. And this is a plant where the lid of the reactor vessel itself has been removed, and the coolant in the system actually floods up the refueling cavity, about the size of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And that water serves as a shielding agent from the harmful radiation below. And when you look through the water, the fuel, the unactivated fuel sort of looks like that. It's irradiated from its prior cycle, glows in the water like that. And the roughly the 30 to 40 feet of water shield the workers above from harmful exposure. And so many different campaigns. This is another one. On the left-hand side, you can see me in a purple hard hat, a much younger me at the time. We literally built this yellow crane, sat it half in the water on top of the mechanical internals package of the reactor, and the crane sat half above the water. And that allowed us to manipulate long-handle tooling, underwater robotics, to be able to perform the necessary hardware upgrades. And I'm super thankful for that experience. It taught me what it meant to create great product, working with high-performing teams of other engineers and technicians, and delivering under mission-critical timelines. It's a fascinating set of experiences. I felt like I had 10 years of hardcore engineering experience in those 5 because the stakes were really high. Just to give you a sense, the opportunity cost of a plant being down for maintenance, and these nuclear plants run at 18-month cycles. So if they're down for a couple months for maintenance, every day that they're not up running at power, that's $1 million or if not more of opportunity costs. So if you delay the schedule by a day, you just impacted their bottom line by $1 million that easily. So gave me a full appreciation of what it took to actually meet stakeholder needs. Well, through that experience, a natural curiosity for business arose, and that curiosity, just I wanted as an engineer to have a bit more license to where my career was going than just the technical aspects. And that curiosity led me to investigate business school. And right down the road from where I was working was Carnegie Mellon, and they were very much empathetic to engineers looking to add that business layer. And it was a good home for the next 2 years. Meanwhile, that creative itch from my youth was still kind of scratching. And aside from the business curriculum, I was also designing like logos for student clubs on campus, helping local entrepreneurs in the Pittsburgh area with artistic explorations. And that little itch, that creative itch, I allowed it to scratch to the point where I decided, you know what, the next company I join post this degree, I wanted to embody some creative faculties as well, beyond just the strategy and technology. I want to find organizations that embody creativity like that. So companies like Nike and Apple were at the top of the list. Thankfully, Nike afforded me a path in. Come graduation, I started as a business planner at world headquarters in Beaverton, Oregon. But in as much as I was willing to learn all that was necessary to solidify that business knowledge from the classroom in a publicly traded company like Nike, the product person was clamoring to meet other product folks inside the Nike portfolio. And after about 18 months of working and planning, I was meeting product folks who would then introduce me to more product folks. And there were opportunities along the way to actually engage in stretch assignments and show those product organizations that I was passionate about what they were doing. And after 18 months, they allowed me an opportunity to join the footwear product engine during an interesting time. And this is a time when the product engines were more serious about really proliferating advanced digital creation techniques inside what had been a very much a physical analog way of creating product. And so this was the first opportunity to join in an operational capacity and really team up with fellow product managers, designers. This is my first time meeting real professional designers for the first time, and engineers to figure out like, how can we help them figure out a better way to manifest their product creation process. And part of that was just getting everyone more versed in 3D tool sets to be able to articulate design intent more fluidly to factory partners by just articulating in 3D format, like what it is you want, and getting samples back that better reflected that design intent rather than the guessing game that was typical whenever you send a 2D sketch and then getting a 3D sample back. So how could you reduce the guessing and allow more time for sweating out the details of the product? So that experience was really just fascinating, and seeing how designers work really stoked my curiosity, as you can imagine. And some newfound creative friends saw the stuff that I would do for hobby and encouraged me to actually try it on real shoes. So I want to give credit to someone you probably had on this platform. Dwayne Edwards gave me my first shot to design shoes under his mentorship. And so we would meet in the mornings, like 6 in the morning, commiserate on the things that he needed to have done. We would go do our day jobs, and then I would work on his stuff until the wee hours at night, and then rinse and repeat the next morning. So we worked together for the better part of a year and ended up executing some shoes that made it to market. Here's just a couple of them, and one door led to another, and I was allowed to do more design explorations in the Nike environment. Meanwhile, outside of Nike, the world was also changing to really appreciate this convergence of disciplines and seeing designers being celebrated on the cover of business magazines. And little did I know, I was reaching a big fork in the road. Nike, in as much as I'm grateful for that environment, allowing me to flex a little bit on footwear design, a few shoe projects didn't necessarily answer my creative foundation. And I could have chosen to claw and scratch some more side hustle shoe projects in the Nike environment. And it might have taken 10 years to be fully pedigreed in their eyes as a footwear designer. Or I could go invest in my creative foundation in a more accelerated way, while not abandoning the technological product and business background that I'd garnered so far. So around this time I was married, and my son wasn't even 1 year old yet. And we made the difficult decision of really pursuing the dream of how can one invest in their career foundation to position themselves the way that they want to sort of operate for the rest of their career. And that decision was leaving Nike, an environment that I really enjoyed, to go back to school to really invest in that creative foundation. So chose ArtCenter College of Design, the graduate industrial design program. And ArtCenter had changed, the graduate programs had changed in very much a way that they started to appreciate other disciplines coming into their fold, rather than the prior precedent where you had to come from design to be a part of the graduate program. They were just opening up the aperture to appreciate multidisciplinary convergence as well. And a lot of the graduates, this notion of designer as entrepreneur was sort of the mandate as you left the programs. And so very much I started helping entrepreneurs in the LA area as I rounded the bend of that industrial design education. And through serendipity, I met a small group of business partners that very much wanted the same thing that I did in terms of that positioning at the intersection of those disciplines. And these were business partners that had traveled long lengths through places like McKinsey, delivering strategy for large organizations, but they also sat in the executive hot seat of some of those big companies as well. And they knew the perils of what typically large companies go through when they pursue any growth idea. You work with a strategy firm for a while, the idea gets handed off to a design firm for a while, and then maybe a couple technological implementation firms before you see an idea or a prototype in market that you can test and learn from. And as we know from watching Silicon Valley and the disruption that comes with digital, no longer do large organizations have the patience for that waterfall process. And so we started, working together out of faith, believing in this multidisciplinary thesis that we had, and we started helping a few companies in our Rolodex, and that attracted the attention of some very big players. So we hopped a couple different platforms as we cut our teeth on our model, but ultimately the Boston Consulting Group attracted us, acquired us, and really invested in us, and we became a wholly owned subsidiary inside of BCG called Digital Ventures. And we, unlike a BCG consultant that would fly out to clients, we invited clients to send high potential people to embed with us in innovation studios that we asked BCG to invest in for us, and we would cook businesses, cook solutions in those innovation studios. And these are just a few shots. Multidisciplinary teaming was the rule. It was the majority of activity, not the exception. And we also gave space for designers to rub elbows with other designers in sort of venture spaces, engineers coding with other engineers. And that multidisciplinary recipe allowed us to show up differently whenever we were coming in market. So you could watch a Post-it note go from an idea to a prototype in a couple of days because we had the talent to really act. One favorite example of mine, Bosch Engineering in Germany came to our Berlin innovation studio with the question around mobility. And so they sent embedded teammates to join our Digital Ventures folks in Berlin. They trusted the process. They went down an innovation journey, and the outcome was them cooking an e-scooter mobility sharing platform where they deployed thousands of scooters across megacities across Europe. And they've since been acquired by another mobility player. So these were real businesses that were being spun out of our multidisciplinary engine of sorts. But I became very concerned about the designer's experience in that fold. Many times when you bring multidisciplinary teams together who aren't used to working with each other as part of the normal course, there's naturally misperceptions around how design is perceived in that. Many times people saw the Post-it notes and the whiteboarding as what they thought was design under the guise of design thinking, oh yeah, that's design. And maybe I can design now, or maybe I can do that. Like, we definitely wanted to share the mindset of the creative process, but I started writing articles and giving talks around, like, we need to give designers room to breathe and allow them to do the things that they do best, to leave the team room, go do what they got to do, and come back to the team room with a substantial idea, investigation, or prototype. And those articles led to talks, led to an invitation to join TED on the stage in Milan. This was a TED Institute event in partnership with BCG, where I talked about this notion of the 4 superpowers of design. And you could argue there might be more than 4 superpowers, but notions of like giving designers the ability to exercise X-ray vision, to really probe on the deeper why, questions behind human behavior, or walking in someone's shoes and really developing empathy and taking that empathy to a level where we actually codify it in products. Um, I'm a big believer in the philosophies of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. So how can you make someone else a superhero and deliver experiences that make them feel like a hero and actually unlock their human potential, playing on flow and creative problem solving to do that. And then lastly, how can we design beyond just rectangular viewports in the phones and iPads that we carry? How can we appreciate all the ingredients that make us human, the physical, the digital, the service-related ingredients that we can design with? So through that process, as I look back on what we were creating in the runway and all the businesses and the potential for design in this very like high tier strategic context, I can truly say that curiosity was the defining thread at each of those moments of experience, and that it was really about creative risk taking and encouraging others to really lean into their curiosity. And I found that in my career, I'm very bullish on the act of leaning into your creativity. So what risks can you take each and every day to propel yourself forward, to really own your career and position yourself the way you want to be positioned? And it's not about shooting at the dark in any direction with your experiments. It's about really laser focused conviction around the things that you believe in, the values that you uphold, and making sure that your calories are best spent in those places. And naturally, those curiosities, as I was navigating those experiments and convictions, led to me, peeling off and creating my own company in Dreams, Design, and Life. I'm very thankful to what BCG allowed us as a runway. But instead of being all things to all industries, all topics in the BCG environment, I wanted to hone my calories against a few select industry zones, as well as design approaches that I really much wanted to spend more of my time in. And so Dreams, Design, and Life's model is really around this notion of delivering breadth and depth. Breadth through strategic design, through rigorous trend curation, feature visioning, and really just being a problem-solving partner in the C-suite, in the strategy room with other client stakeholders and other disciplines. But then once we uncover those ideas, really delivering depth of expertise to ensure that design outcomes are as relevant as they can be against that strategy. And doing that under fluid arrangements, whether it's shared risk and reward or for fees or for co-investing in a venture. A few examples really quickly. One venture that I'm a co-investor, co-founder in is this blockchain venture called Kivo, where we're looking at the space of emerging hardware wallets and all the taxing analog steps that you need to take to ensure that your blockchain crypto transactions are actually upheld and not vulnerable to attacks from hacks, or even simple things like if you were to unfortunately pass away, how your loved ones could actually have access to the resources that you saved. Like, this world is not as convenient as your typical savings, retirement, or investment accounts. So how can we pursue a better mousetrap to answer those market frictions that we see? And so that was a strategic design journey, an industrial design journey to arrive at a hardware form factor that allowed a greater ease of being able to encrypt your identity, your biometric information. And we created this carbon key mirror device where that your information, your identity, your keys would transport over to the carbon key, and Kivo as a service would take that carbon key and put it into cold storage. So we have a partnership with Iron Mountain, like the world's most renowned and trusted cold vault storage provider. Well, they store these carbon keys for Kivo customers. And if you were to lose your Kivo device, you could immediately have your carbon key sent back to you, get a new Kivo, click them together, and immediately get restored. So beyond just the form factor itself, we're thinking about service model where we're entertaining beneficiary services, extensive coin support, storing your carbon key, and making crypto transactions hopefully just as easy as if you were manipulating any other savings instrument and your other type of investment accounts. Another example project is a partnership with a wellness IoT company in Irvine, California. I'm not allowed to show you any latest industrial design thinking, but their present product is a breathalyzer device where employees of enterprises that engage in benefits programs, if they have Envoy as a part of their benefits package, They can pick up this device in the morning, blow into it, and have the system unlock all this new and novel understanding about what's happening in your metabolism. It can understand if you're burning fat and other indicators, and help someone actually navigate toward a higher state of well-being. And for enterprises that make this a part of their benefits programs, you can imagine the savings because they're navigating a population of employees that are a lot healthier, that offer a lower risk profile as they navigate forward, saving everyone money in the process. And so we've had to work hard to distill the stakeholder value criteria that's at play with each of the constituents, not just the end user, but other beings on the platform, whether it's the coaching analysts that engage each employee over the platform, that dissect the data and provide the human-centered support necessary to coach someone forward toward a higher state of well-being. And affordances manifest, whether it's devices that we're designing, digital experiences that we're crafting, or even like thinking of pop-up shops that we have to create to support particular enterprises that might not allow us to access their employees via email. Like, how can you create a store in a matter of weeks to allow people to come in and exercise their wellness curiosities as they navigate the Envoy platform? So through that experience, I'm a huge believer, as you can imagine, in multidisciplinary collaboration. And then the question becomes, what does that teaming actually give you if you really invest and prioritize it? I believe it really is the currency of how we can see the future together and through different lenses. And I'll quickly fly through some perspective here. We can look to that future time horizon and look at things through the lens of people and their concerns, and employ a number of different design investigative techniques to really get on the ground and not just design for, but really design with people, and distill the value criteria that matters and map the exchanges of value accordingly. We can also look at the industry that we're serving and use tools like the business model canvas to really break down and ask questions of, like, why are things the way they are? Like, why does it need to continue to be that way? And can we actually start asking questions and probing on some of those foundational assumptions to open up avenues for disruption? And one anecdote from my footwear days was just looking at the heavy investment in steel molds for midsoles and outsole components. And I know the engineering organizations for a lot of our top brands, they're looking at other ways to accomplish a mold. And can we create a nylon mold with additive manufacturing and maybe enable some long tail one-off opportunities without having to invest so much in extensive steel molds, especially for product where perhaps we're providing one-offs that really evoke personalized or customized experiences for end users. And beyond just questioning core assumptions behind how we do things, our business decisions also have a broader implication on data ethics, our society, the environment. So how can we actually use other types of canvases, like the impact canvas, nurtured by a friend of mine, Craig Walmsley at Publicis Sapient, creating new zones for us to ask questions around, like, what are the broader implications of what we're doing? And how can we ask questions? Then trends. How can we actually bring in fresh inspirations beyond our immediate worldview and ensure that we're opening the aperture? And when we speak of trends, oftentimes our minds go to technology, and we can go to places like CES and the like to understand like what's happening in certain spaces. But what we encourage is taking a more holistic view toward trends. And there's a number of different categories that we could curate. And so in the problem solving, how can we curate the social trends that are upon us? Technology, of course, but also economic trends, environment, political, regulatory, legal trends, and even other categories of trend like energy or even healthcare delivery models. How can we curate trends as vectors and begin to understand how they could shape the art of what's possible in the future? And we can sort of forecast the funnel of probability or plausibility if we map ourselves out 1, 3, 5, 10 years from now. And instead of just designing for the most likely path based on recent events, how can we stretch our creative thinking to imagine different future canvases or landscapes that we might design for, that even brush up against the border of science fiction to just really energize our creativity? And then through collecting exemplars, these are like the living proof of these trends taking shape, whether they be startups that we're watching, luminaries that we follow, thought leadership, or communities. I look to folks like Mary Meeker and John Maeda annually to just understand their perspectives of how the world is changing. And then having these conversations as a part of ongoing design communities also just keeps inspiration full and allowing me as a creative problem solver to bring a fresh set of inspirations to any problem that we're engaging. And then, what do we do with all these insights? We can take that through, a human-centered or design thinking problem solving process with other disciplines. I'm sure you're all familiar with double diamonds and things like that. But anytime I see like linear sequential maps of process like this, I kind of cringe a little bit because the reality is a lot messier. Oftentimes we have to respect a large business that's already running and have to look for those incremental innovations to help a brand re-engineer or reimagine the core experiences that they offer. But we also, especially with my company, we spend a lot of time building the innovation muscles that need to run alongside the core franchise of a given brand and ensure that they're in a place where they can actually develop new concepts, new prototypes, new potential business opportunities that they can evoke while being respectful for the large franchise that they've already established. So, many times it's having a startup mentality and carving team members, multidisciplinary team members, away from the core business concern to allow them the runway to provoke a new opportunity. And whether that's cultivating new experiences through wireframes, prototypes, design thinking exercises, whatever it might be, ultimately we're trying to arrive at a story of what's possible and appreciate also the systematic elements that need to come together to make those stories meaningful and feasible to deliver. But through that, I think in the final notes that I'll highlight is that we definitely look to places like Silicon Valley and watch the speed of disruption, speed of startups, and this notion of move fast and break things. Well, if 2020 taught us anything, we may need to slow down and really appreciate the vulnerabilities that are at play. I think COVID shined a light on many discrepancies and gaps in our infrastructure and our systems that need to support people, that need to support our families, our communities, our broader society, even ourselves. The recent events with George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, shining a light on, we have another pandemic at play around societal imbalance and really appreciating the threads of systemic racism that have informed a lot of present day's institutions and enterprises of which we navigate. And while we've all been jarred by the overt racism that we've seen on social media, it also makes me as a Black American think about a lot of the covert racism that happens behind the scenes, especially in places where we spend a lot of time. And it's personal from a family perspective. This is an old piece of family history. The baby being held by my grandmother is my mother. She was just under 2 at the time, and these are all of some of her siblings. She was one of 10 kids, and they're standing in front of the house that just got burned down by white supremacists. So literally they're taking this picture in front of the burning embers. This shot made it into the newspaper at the time. And this was in Tallahassee, Florida. And so these are part of just my lived experiences and the generational stories that have been passed down that I already understood as a member of the Black community. And right now we see the world waking up to these stories as well. So I guess through that perspective, this is the world that I've lived in, especially over the last 10 years of my 20-year career. But this is no longer enough. Like design, business, and technology coming together to appreciate multidisciplinary opportunities, that's one thing. But what we've seen is that our decisions have an impact on the broader ecology, no matter where we're navigating. And we have to be respectful and appreciate what's at play. And that's no longer enough now based on the learnings of 2020. We have to appreciate the threads of systemic injustice that are pervading everything and see where we need to dismantle, where we need to improve, where we need to work together to create better futures for a more diverse and representative world. And I want to, again, I'm wrapping up here, but I do want to give credit to a gentleman that has turned into a mentor for me, and John Maeda, who again, as I mentioned before, it creates this annual perspective of around how design has a place, a growing place in technology and in venture and these kind of things. Well, his recent report was recently branded as the 2026 report. And he created a very much an interactive video presentation, and he invited subsequent conversations with other thought leaders to build on his initial perspectives. And online, on my company website, you can find a video of our conversation around what 2026 means for our future. And we had a rich conversation around notions of, when we think about like the waves of industrial revolution that we've all experienced, who built the wealth, who was exploited, who was left out of the party in many cases, especially now we find ourselves in Industry 4.0, who's being left out, and what are the implications as we move to the future, and especially as Moore's law proves resilient and continues to forge ahead like a locomotive train. How is computation benefiting us or potentially driving harm? Many of the biases that we find in AI and other platforms like it could be further compounded, further multiplied, and it's already happening. It's not about being careful, it's already happening. So how can we as designers influence and ensure that biases are not being compounded against our society? And as we think about the future of design and innovation studios, are there actually is the actual makeup of those teams and organizations mirroring the world in terms of representation? Can we design with? Can we respect societal imbalance? Can we respect culture and not extract or exploit culture? Like your favorite world-class design agency, a world-class brand that espouses their virtues, might not be able to claim those things if they're not representative against a richly diverse world. And this speaks to individual evolution. I promise I'm finishing up, Hector. This speaks to individual evolution of how we see ourselves. If we're navigating a very much a multidisciplinary reality that considers all these forces, as designers, I think we have to think about how do we uniquely exercise breadth and depth as we navigate forward. Breadth in terms of how are we as designers able to collaborate and communicate and align with different disciplines that are in the room with us more and more. We're going to find ourselves in the room more and more with more diverse actors. Like, how do we handle ourselves as creative contributors? Are we problem solvers that can operate at parity with those other disciplines? Like, what's our role in the room? We have to think about that in terms of the breadth that we each offer. And then the depth of expertise. How can we get away from the team room and be the designers that we're meant to be, and ensuring that we're delivering world-class craft and excellence with our design contributions? So I encourage each of us to think about our breadth and depth as we move forward, because I think we're going to have our own unique flavor of what that can mean. And that's where I believe vulnerabilities can turn into opportunities if we exercise our creative courage. And that honestly gives me hope for what we're navigating now and the hope of how we can influence change for the future. Thanks, and happy to entertain questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. That was really inspirational and very informative. So we really appreciated. Thank you. That was amazing. And like I mentioned, for those who are tuning in, please, I encourage you to ask questions. But I have a couple of questions to kick things off, and they kind of span everywhere from as I was listening to your presentation. My first question is, your journey is very unique, starting off as an engineer and then just kind of tapping into, like you had said, you were always creative when you were younger. Um, I think there's a misconception in our industry in design. I'm going to say design because people can define what design or designer means to them. But at least in industrial design, I feel like there might be a misconception that you somehow have to go to industrial design school, and then you have to then have experience, and then that's what gives you the right or the credibility to talk about design. And I feel like that is not true at all. I feel like you define what is a designer, and I think your journey really speaks volumes when I'm thinking about this designer role. You started as engineer, and you kind of worked in different places. You went to graduate school for business and then eventually for design, and you kind of you're the one who defined your role as a what is design through your journey. And I very much love that, because I feel like if you are out there and you're listening to this, or you're watching this at a much later time, don't feel like if you missed out on design school when you were younger, that you don't have the opportunity to be involved in a creative field. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, no, I appreciate it. Appreciate the perspective from how you received that, and I definitely, going back to design school. Like I thought I was done with school, and the investment associated with it was a lot, right? And so I would never like encourage anyone to just repeat exactly what I did. But to your point, though, we now live in such a connected world where there's so many different ways to garner the knowledge, to get cycles under your belt. Again, I could have made the choice to stay at Nike. That was a viable choice. But I did recognize that it would have taken me longer to get the side hustle cycles,
Mhm.
right? And while also being respectful to the day job requirements, because that had to be done with excellence too.
Right.
So, or basically saying, you know what, I'm gonna use this moment to take full ownership of my career. And I see the experiments actually led up to making a smart decision of whether I should, can I do it? Should I do it? What will the accelerated learning mean for the future trajectory?
Mhm.
And really like solidify my place of how I see my career unfolding, and really benchmarking that on terms of like luminaries that I saw doing it ahead of me, like folks like John Maida and others, where it's like, okay, this bet, even though it's super risky,
Mhm.
it's rational based on where the world is moving.
Mhm.
And and allowing those curiosities to turn into experiments, turn into like the convictions are actually sound. I'm not crazy for thinking this way and taking ownership for the career. So that's, there's so many ways to learn, right? In person, finding mentors, working as an apprentice, going into a formal education, going onto a lot of the, self-derived learning platforms that allow you sort of, more micro doses of education to eventually find your way. But you got to start. This is what I
Right.
would.
Absolutely. And I think you also talked about at Nike, you were hired to do something with business, and you kind of took it upon yourself to almost create opportunities to be involved in another discipline. And I think one takeaway that I got from that is, um, just don't settle for the job that you were hired for, because you can evolve into so many different ways if you do kind of find these small opportunities to be involved in other ways, and you don't know where that can lead you. A lot of doors will open because of that.
Yep. No, no. And I'll be honest, the initial curiosities to want to go stretch over to those other zones wasn't always welcome, right? It
Mm.
was like, you know, and again, I don't hold any ill will or judging people for how they perceived me, because everyone's busy, right?
Right.
They may have saw my title. They didn't know Kevin. They saw a title. Oh, you're just a business guy. What are you doing over here? I got that a lot.
Right.
Or, without having a rich portfolio of super extensive experience like other people that may have started in design, like I had to understand those gaps and
Mm.
figure out how do I like recover or catch up or do atypical things. But at the end of the day, I think the stretch assignments showed that no one's going to turn down bad work,
Yep.
and people will appreciate that solution orientation to want to help them.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. You went to grad school at Art Center, which when I think or talk about Art Center, um, it's pretty overwhelming, because Art Center has a reputation of being a very difficult school to get into, but also as a student, it's probably one of the best schools in the world, or in the country, definitely in the country. And I would love to hear about what were you going through as you were going back to school, after already having two degrees. Um, and I know you had talked about that ArtCenter was also changing, allowing students from other disciplines. Um, but you must have been really anxious.
Yeah, I was scared, intimidated. We walked through the student gallery like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. But it's funny, between the different educations I had before, I never worked so hard in a collegial environment as I did at ArtCenter. I remember having a beer as an MBA student. There was no time and there was very little sleep.
Yeah.
And I was an older student at this point, right? My wife and son were like heroes to go through the sacrifice with me. And it was hard for, them to understand, like, why am I at the campus all the time, right? It's just the iterative nature. But I think through that, it's almost like the Karate Kid mentality of like, you got to go through these exercises because it's building new muscles. And I also had to learn to like unravel some muscles that weren't working for me when I was thinking about embracing creativity as a new set of capabilities. I had to unlearn some things from my prior backgrounds, those former biases that got in the way of a creative problem solving process.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, and that takes a lot of compromising, a lot of sacrifice, like you mentioned with your family, but also with yourself. There's a lot of things that, like you mentioned, you had to unlearn and unpackage, and yeah. I mean, I feel like as you get older, you people are starting to sometimes settle for what they have or what they're doing. Um, I'm not here to judge anyone, but definitely, you know, having that mindset of just continuing education is good, and I think that is very inspiring. So, kudos to you, Kevin. That's pretty awesome. You when you were going through your presentation, I get a very good sense of your design leadership, and that is something that you don't learn in school.
Mm.
um, if someone is trying to strive to have good leadership, whether they're a manager at their current job, or they want to lead people at a nonprofit, or whatever, however way they want to lead people. Well,
Mm.
what are some things that they can do to really learn how to become a good leader? Because I can sense that from you as you were presenting and you were talking about your work, how you work with people. um, and I think being a good leader is learning to listen to people, and really, being at the forefront of the human experience. I would love to hear from you about what is a good leader.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think it sort of started with how I observed my father growing up. The few times I would like follow him to work or whatever, and watching my dad. Before you can lead anyone, there has to be a relationship of trust established first and foremost. Like, does that person or the team that you're working with, do they believe that you have their back? That has to be established.
Mm.
And working as an engineer, a young engineer, I did whatever the team needed before I was even expected to lead. And I'm a professional engineer with a degree coming into this nuclear environment, so there were certain expectations that come with degreed professionals. You have to supervise pretty quickly. You have to do some things. But I remember that sort of value from my father always echoing, and that the teams that I was a part of, they knew I had their back. Whatever was necessary, I was going to figure it out to serve them, and serve the people on the front lines.
Mhm.
That mentality, I think I carried through my entire career. And lately, especially as we were building digital ventures inside of the giant BCG and a new muscle that people didn't necessarily understand at first. And then we're expected to bring in more designers like me that, embodied that set of muscles. When the early designers come on board and they say, I don't, I don't know what you want from me. Like, I don't know what success looks like for this job. Help me understand. So like realizing, our gaps as we were putting the wheels in the cars, it's flying down the freeway. Like, what are the elements of role clarity,
Mhm.
people enablement, methodologies? What also enablers do they need to do their job successfully? And like, how do you reward and motivate people to learn more and do more, and not just fulfill the expectations of a job, but leave the job better than when they found it? So creating a rubric of empowerment, really, that taught me invaluable lessons, especially as the design organization got really big in that fold. It's one of my proudest achievements, and it's not the things that I did. It's like what we enabled others to do, that where their design work had such an impact on the ventures that they created for BCG's clients.
That's amazing. We have a couple of questions here from our audience, and this question here is actually a fantastic question. It's asked by one of my students currently who is going to the Academy of Art University in San Francisco. His name is Aaron Anderson, and his question is, you spoke about unlearning biases. Can you talk more about unlocking your creativity side versus your MBA engineering side? He is currently an engineer who is attending graduate school for product design.
No, I appreciate the question. You know, I think what I had to unlearn is sometimes in those environments, you have your own process from your own prior experience, right? It might have been a hypothesis first problem solving method where you are expected to have a smart answer on day one. And this comes from definitely a business school sort of vibe and pedigree. And you kind of looked at, with weird eyes if you don't have that answer out the gate, right? So, but having such an alpha assertion could shut other people in the room down, or it could actually limit the aperture because, for this problem, of course we need an e-commerce site that does X, Y, and Z. Like, let's just start designing wireframes for that. And that could be the conversation if we're not careful. We could totally miss, a true means of human-centered empowerment as a part of that problem. Or, an engineer evoking a desire to want to jump to a prototype when, and exercising a scientific method around that prototyping, when we may not even have a good starting point on what the value criteria is in the first place. So we're positing some answer versus the correct sort of space that we should be navigating. So these biases are all around us. We all carry them. I always have to check myself, and I don't pretend to have all the answers. But again, the more we find ourselves in these rooms that are multidisciplinary, we have to think about, like, what are the things that get in the way of our teaming chemistry to allow the sparks and connections to actually happen.
That's a very good answer. I think as more designers and students who start to explore other disciplines and start to have multidisciplinary perspective and start getting degrees to supplement their current expertise, I think they should be open to a lot of that. I think that really defines how someone should approach kind of unlocking your creative side. That being said, I think it is important for if you're a designer to supplement your current knowledge, and if you're an engineer, supplement that, and vice versa. I think that's just going to help you become the designer, or the designer of the future, right? Because design is evolving and moving into a very interesting way, and I think we all have to be ready and adapt to how design changes. So I think that's fantastic. I have a couple more questions, and we can kind of start wrapping things up here. My question number one is, the name of your company is called Dreams, Design, and Life, and I just love that name.
Thanks.
I want to know how you came up with that very clever and unique title.
No, it's funny. I think it was a couple of years of experimentation actually that led to, whether I knew it or not, it was happening. Like, aside from my role at BCG, I had friends that had startups that were reaching out saying, "Hey, can't afford BCG and all this, that whole team, but can you actually help me, like, with my idea of a particular device that we're creating, or even help us with our business strategy?" And they were in those zones, those industry spaces that I was very passionate. And coming from a physical and digital career, I wanted to hit those IoT opportunities where you had device experience and services kind of connected together, and then besides just like helping companies transform themselves by digitization, like, what are the real human problems that we can solve? Like, what can we unlock? And so I started, like, whether it's on social media or the things that I write, I would tend to start using this hashtag around dreaming, like dreaming bigger, design being the medium between future and the concrete realities of now, and life manifesting sort of like we're navigating the difficulties of life, the challenges and opportunities of life. And I started like creating a hashtag out of it, actually, probably a couple of years before I decided to start a company. So I just turned my hashtag to the brand, basically.
I think you ended up at a very good. I mean, that name just very unique. I think it's pretty awesome. So
Thanks, man.
I have one more question here, and there is a very someone just asked this it's like 5 different questions here, and I'm sorry if we don't get to this, but I will when we upload this on YouTube. I'll make sure that we also tag your social media handles, so like that if anyone wants to reach out on social media or comment on any of your posts, feel free. But my question to you is, towards the end of your presentation, you talked about race. And I think that is something more than ever 2020 has really amplified this issue, and it affects everyone. There's a lot of, I feel like our field of design, again, I'm going to be very subjective with that name. I don't want to focus it on industrial design, but in general, the creative field is a field that it's not very accessible to a lot of minorities or the people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who do have the opportunity to be a creative, I feel like a lot of them don't have a voice to speak up or share their work, or might feel a little intimidated by putting their stuff out there. What is some advice you have for that?
Well, it is very difficult. And I'll start from sort of the challenges that I had entertaining design, right? Seeing it as a viable path to augment my professional trajectory. But I can truly say that I didn't feel welcome. I didn't see manifestations of me very often, which feeds into intimidation, even like fighting internal, what do they call it? Internal insecurities and of like, am I good enough? Can I do this? That sort of complex fighting through that was really, really tough. But then you ultimately find like your Dwayne Edwards of the world and other, Black professionals, but it's still very few and far between.
Right.
And then your world favorite design agencies or brands not even allowing me past the foyer for a wide variety of reasons. And I can handle constructive critique, whether it's portfolio or whatever, or the interview process. But a lot of it too was subjective, where it made you wonder what was the motivation of not feeling like this was accessible for you, and feeling it in the body language and the response. So I think our industry has work to do to change that perception, because the perception is real, right? There are talented Black creatives out there that need a platform. And I appreciate the platform you're providing, because I've seen you really celebrate all types of people on this platform. And I think that's helpful. That's a starting point. So the more that we can tell these stories, but I would say is to answer your question, for that emerging creative from an underrepresented group, the world is so multifaceted, so connected, so diverse. This is more than just touchy feel good. This is more than just a social impact endeavor around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mm-hmm. Like, this is actually good business. This is good, human societal contribution. So business, society together, like this is what the future requires. It's not like a nice to have. If you want to be relevant as a brand, if you want to be future fit, your teams better be representative. Like, if I'm designing for an audience in New York City that is 25% Black, and I look at your studio and it ain't 25% Black, I'm gonna start asking questions. You can't proclaim to be world class, in my opinion. So that's my hot take when it comes to our industry. And that even if you found design like unconventionally, like myself, very unconventional, and there's probably so many infinite stories out there, have the creative courage keep going, don't give up, because know that your voice is needed. It's missing. And we wouldn't have many other, we wouldn't have so many problems when it comes to like the design outcomes that we see coming out into the market, whether it be an AI platform, a new app, a new, service-based experience. The biases are like glaring because people weren't designed alongside with, they were designed for from an ivory tower. There was disconnects in understanding the value criteria, the respect for the culture. Like, your voice is absolutely needed, is what I would tell that person.
That's very well said. I think our, and like you mentioned, like design is a global scale. You can't be, you know, you can't have a diverse team if you're going to be designing on a global scale. When the when you think of the population of on a global scale, that we are the majority, right? Like, and you can't be saying things like, we are a world renowned studio, but we're designing for, yeah, exactly. So I think you're absolutely right. I think, and thank you for saying that our organization, I think one thing that really prompted our organization to make sure that we give everyone a voice is my own personal experience as a student. I would be like, like there's not many Mexican designers. And if there were, they were already too far for me to reach, and too inaccessible. Like, they were directors or creative designers, and I was just a student. And I was like, there's this huge gap. And, you know, there's no one that I can relate to. And I think that's what started this movement. And I'm happy that others have also are doing it on social media, and are having platforms to create these opportunities of accessibility. um, but thank you so much. I know there's so many things that we still need to cover. I know you mentioned that you're coming out with a book, which is very exciting. Please let us know when that drops so that we can help you promote that.
Okay.
You talked about breadth and depth, and oh my God, I hope that that's like a mantra that you come up with, because I think that's fantastic. But for those who came in late, or for those who are not here, highly suggest you rewatch this interview with Kevin. It's fantastic, the insights that he provided to us in his presentation. And Kevin, thank you so much for your time again. We really appreciate it. And thank you for tuning in and being a part of Lens with Advanced Design on this Sunday afternoon. So till next time, Kevin, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.